Hello, scholars. Welcome to our next study in history, the United States Constitution. Now, a quick note as we jump in and get started. To help keep us on track with the amount of history we need to look at this school year, we're only going to spend the next 2 days, next two lessons, on the United States Constitution. It's important to note that much of what we're talking about today was actually happening during the same period of time that the Patriots, right, the Americans, were fighting to gain their independence. They had to have a government ready to go when, if they were successful in breaking away from the mother country of Great Britain. Keep that in mind as you're listening to today's information. So, today, our objectives. We will learn about the creation of state constitutions as the United States was formed, and we will learn about the creation of the United States' central government called the Articles of Confederation. Scholars, the Articles of Confederation was the name given to the first form of government set up by the United States. Keep that in mind as you're listening. Articles of Confederation, the first form of government of the United States. Here we go. As we learned in the American Revolution study, Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. He had three important ideas about government when he was working on the Declaration. The first of those, people have rights and they should be protected. The people have a right to get rid of the government and create another one. And the power of the government comes from the people. Let's think about that for a moment. Do these fit into what was happening with the colonists? Right? People have rights and they should be protected. Remember, the colonists were feeling their rights were not being protected. So setting up a government where the rights were protected was very important. Number two, the people have a right to get rid of the government and create another one. Essentially, scholars, that's what they're trying to do in their fight to break away from Great Britain, right? Getting rid of the government they have and creating a new one. That's also going to be very important later as we hear more about the Articles of Confederation. And number three, the power of the government comes from the people, meaning that the people decide how much power the government has, that the government can only do what the people are saying it can do. These are three really important ideas and are still today, over 200 years later, very important ideas. Now, Thomas Jefferson did also say that a limited government depends on the consent of the people. You'll hear more in a few moments about limited government. But first, let's talk for a moment about virtue. Can you think of a virtue that Thomas Jefferson showed while working on the Declaration of Independence? Now, keep in mind that after Jefferson wrote it, it was revised by John Adams, then by Benjamin Franklin, and lastly by the rest of the committee. During that process, 47 changes were made and 3 paragraphs were added. Once the Second Continental Congress voted to separate from Great Britain, 39 more changes were made before the Declaration of Independence was adopted, signed by the Second Continental Congress on July 4th of 1776. So 86 changes were made and 3 paragraphs added from the time Thomas Jefferson started to the final product of the Declaration of Independence that we know today. 86 changes. What virtue comes to mind as you think of Thomas Jefferson working on that, continuing to revise it? I know the virtue that pops in my mind: fortitude, right? not giving up, keeping going. Wow. So, back to this idea of limited government. He said a limited government depends on the consent of the people. It's called a limited government because the people have the right to limit the power of their government. Again, the people decide how much power the government has, what the government can do and cannot do. As this idea, right, was formed and worked on, each state had to create a constitution for itself once America won its independence. A constitution, a government for each state, is like the framework of a house, the structure of the house, the walls, the roof, the floor, that main structure. Think for a moment if you've ever built with Legos or blocks or craft sticks, right? You're building the structure, the framework of the house. So the Constitution is like that framework of how is this going to work? How are we going to create this basic structure, this foundation? And then, scholars, the laws themselves can be thought of as being like the furniture inside the house. Right? Think of it like this: it's possible to add furniture, change furniture, right? Think again of that furniture being laws, right? So adding laws, changing the furniture, switching from a crib to a bigger bed, right? Getting a new couch. Right? So the laws are like the furniture inside that house, right? You're working on putting those things in, changing them, right? As time goes by, making them better, right? Differing them, changing them. But that main framework, that constitution, stays the same. Now, yes, you can add on to your house, right? Changing the structure, changing the framework, right? Adding another room, adding a second level. Maybe you've seen houses that have done that before. So it's possible to do that, but it takes a lot more work, a lot more work would go into changing the Constitution, the framework, than just adding laws. So again, think of it as the laws being the things that go into that framework, into that structure. As they were creating those state constitutions, those frameworks for each state, they had to say what the government could and could not do. Those things included such things as the right to a trial by jury, the right to assemble peacefully. Hey, wait a minute. Did those sound like the rights of Englishmen? Yes. Because of those rights of Englishmen, they were pretty easy. It was pretty easy for them to decide things they wanted to put in that the government could do and could not do related to the rights of the people. There were two additional important freedoms that they made sure were placed into their state constitutions. One of those was the freedom of religion. People may believe as they wish in regarding religion, or they may believe nothing at all. This freedom of religion meant you could not have a state required religion, or the country would not have a required religion. You were free to believe as you wished. A second important freedom, the freedom of speech. People are free to speak their minds, sharing their thoughts and opinions on what the government, right, is doing or not doing. Right? They are free to discuss that, to share that, to write about it. These seem like great things, right? naming specifically what the government can and cannot do. But there were some problems with it too. The biggest problem, it gave most power to the legislature, which is the group that makes the laws for the state, but too little power to the governor of the state. In most cases, the governor was just a title and had no real power to do anything. That ends up being a little bit of a problem. Now, even though there were some problems, it did something great as well. In their state constitutions, 5 northern states passed laws to end slavery. Right there in their state constitutions, in the frameworks for their state government. Now, no southern states were willing to do that, but several of those southern states did also make it easier for slave owners to free their enslaved people if they wanted to. So that's a really big deal. The Articles of Confederation, the name given to the central government of the entire United States when it won its independence. So that framework, that structure of the government for the United States would be called the Articles of Confederation. It was written by the Second Continental Congress, and as I said, it formed the government for the new United States. Now, it created strong state governments, but a weak central government. What that means is it gave the central government, the government to run the whole new United States, too little power. Now, that may not seem important to you right now as you're listening, but a weak central government means that the government for the whole country could not collect any taxes to run the country, and it could not declare war against another country or establish peace with another country. Now, again, maybe those things don't seem so important, but it does take money to run the entire United States. So, not being able to collect taxes from the citizens ends up being a problem. Sure, they would reach out and ask states for money, but there was no requirement to do so. So, some states might give money to help run the central government, and other states would not. It ended up being a problem. So, despite a problem of not having a strong enough central government to run the whole United States, there was one thing that the Articles of Confederation did do really well, and that relates to the Northwest Ordinance. In 1787, the Northwest Ordinance was passed, giving people who were settling in the Northwest Territory, which is circled in red on this map, it gave them the same rights as the people in the 13 states. That might not seem like a big deal, but it is. They're saying anybody living in this territory, this area that's not states, is going to be treated equally to everyone who is living in one of the states. Right? Scholars, that's really important because this is what the colonists had just been going through with their mother country of Great Britain. Right? They themselves had been colonists who were not being treated equally. So the Northwest Ordinance stated that these colonists would be treated equally. And They said once the population reached a certain number, right? Once many people were living there, the territory would have enough people to become a state that would be equal to all the other states that were the original 13. Think of that. So, those original 13 colonies that have become the first 13 states are saying once any of this area has enough people living in it to become a state, we will let it become a state and we will let it have the same equal treatment and be equal to us original 13. Now, taking a look at this map, you can see from that Northwest Territory eventually become 5 states that are added to the United States: Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. Also, you can see there toward the north end, the top end of the map, right? A little chunk of Minnesota is there as well in the territory, but Minnesota and the rest of the state, right, become a state a little bit later than these 5. One other thing it did in the Northwest Ordinance, this is really important. It passed a law as a part of this Northwest Ordinance that required each of these states to not allow slavery when it would become a state. So basically, the Northwest Ordinance said you can become a state and be treated equally to the other states, but slavery will not be allowed in your state when you join us. So that's really important. The Northwest Ordinance stated that any new state joining from that territory could not allow slavery. It's important to note that during this time in history, as the United States is forming its own government, there is just starting to be a change, slowly, but finally, in thinking regarding slavery and owning people. This change in thinking is taking shape mostly in the northern states, right, where we just heard 5 states in their state governments have laws now against slavery, and new states joining from the Northwest Territory cannot have slavery. Yet, this change will continue very, very slowly, and it will be a big problem area for the states and the country as it continues to grow. But keep in mind this idea, right, that we now today know, but this idea of not enslaving other people is just starting to form. People are starting to see that it's wrong, but it's a really very slow process. So, back to the Articles of Confederation. This form of government that, remember, ended up being too weak of a central government, too weak of a government to run the whole country. Well, they worked under the Articles of Confederation for 6 years. But after 6 years of the United States being run by the Articles of Confederation, they were realizing it wasn't working. So a meeting was called, a constitutional convention, to mend, right? Meaning fix, repair the Articles of Confederation because they knew it was not working well. But some of the delegates who were there, some of the leaders who were chosen to go to this meeting, didn't want to just mend or fix the Articles of Confederation. They wanted to scrap it and actually start over and create a whole new government. Some of the people supporting that idea of a stronger central government and starting over, getting rid of the Articles of Confederation? Alexander Hamilton, George Washington, James Madison. They all were attendees, delegates at this constitutional convention, and really wanted to scrap it and start over. Imagine that. Taking something you've worked on, something that's been going on and being used for 6 years, getting rid of it and starting over with a whole new thing. Everyone who's been working on their fairy tale right now, imagine scrapping that and starting over on a whole new fairy tale back at the very first step. Similar idea. Now, not everyone wanted a stronger central government. Other delegates at the meeting were against the idea of having a stronger central government. They did not want to scrap it and create a whole new government. They wanted to do just the mending. They didn't think the central government running the whole United States needed to be any stronger. Patrick Henry was one of those people. Remember him? Give me liberty or give me death. I am not a Virginian. I am an American. Well, he was selected as a delegate, but he did not go to the convention. He said he smelled a rat, meaning he had the feeling they were going to try to scrap it and start over, and he was not in favor of this idea of a stronger central government, a whole new government. He was against this idea, so he said he would not attend the meeting. Even so, the fact was that a stronger central government was indeed needed. A new government that was called a federal system, meaning the power would be divided between the state government and a central government, right, running the whole country. That would be called the federal government. By doing this, it meant they would need to actually get rid of the Articles of Confederation, the form of government that was running the United States after 6 years, and create a whole new government for the country. Scholars, that's where we're going to stop today. The decision has been made at this constitutional convention to scrap it and start over, creating a new government. In our next lesson, you will hear about that new government. We're going to close today with a little fun fact. Benjamin Franklin, who was a delegate to the convention, was in his early 80s by the time of the Constitutional Convention. He was brought around town, Philadelphia, where they were meeting, and to those convention meetings in the manner you see in this picture. Right? He was carried around inside that. I just thought that was an interesting, fun little fact about him. So, again, next time, the creation of the new government to replace the Articles of Confederation. So, today we learned about the creation of state constitutions as the United States was being formed, right? The government naming what you could and could not do, including freedom of religion and freedom of speech. Remember, as a part of that, 5 states also passed laws saying you could not have slavery. And we learned about the creation of the United States' central government, the government to run the whole country, called the Articles of Confederation. And we found out after 6 years of the government being run under the Articles of Confederation that it was not working. It did not create a strong enough central government, and it would have to be scrapped. All right, the last thing you need to do is your assignment. Open that attached Google form, answer the questions about today's lesson. Remember, you can look back at the lesson. Click submit at the bottom of the Google form to get those answers sent to your teacher. Thanks for joining me. And next lesson, the new government for the United States of America. Thanks for joining me.